with the pledge to the flag. Next up on the agenda, we have the superintendent's report with Mr. Michael Brooks.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I have a couple of quick items. First of all, Pat, if you could just give the board a quick update on the Department of Defense grant that we just received word on with you and Fred with our food service program, please.
Sure. We just found out today, Mr. Callow had seen that there was an opportunity to apply for a grant for some fresh produce. He did apply and we did receive, I think it was about $5,500, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
$5,000, $5,500 from Department of Defense, which is kind of an odd place to get that, but on fresh produce. So that will be utilized this year and will directly offset some of the expense of the cost of food for the lunch and breakfast program.
So it was something that Fred found out about, applied for, and it was nice to be able to receive that. It'll definitely offset some of the costs and help out our bottom line in the food service program. So, carrying on with that theme, also I know Mr. Callow and Ms. Hecht have been working on a summer food grant also, so maybe Ms. Hecht, if you could kind of brief where we are with that, what we've done with it historically, but also your plans for going forward.
So, as Mr. Brooks said, it is a grant for the summer food program. There are certain requirements that we must meet within the application so that we can do it. One of them is, for instance, we're connecting it to our reading program and to students who are on free and reduced lunch. So we have to meet a criteria of at least 50% of the children in the program being on free and reduced lunch, and then we can offer to all children who are involved in that program. So we did attend a workshop last week, which was very informative. There were 6 individuals from State Ed, very, very helpful, extending themselves to us if we have any questions. So we're meeting next week again to talk about this even further, but it's very exciting, very exciting. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And Mr. Bakatsias has a quick update on where we are with the fix and repair on our existing phone system. So, Mike, if you just kind of give a status update.
Thank you. The repair is scheduled for Monday. It will spill over into Tuesday, but during the break, Northeast came down, did an analysis of exactly what needed to be done, and they'll be down Monday and Tuesday. So I expect by Monday evening, we're on that newer system, and that should carry us through till replacement.
Right. And there's an item later on in the recommended actions regarding the MCSD telephone resolution. If you recall, the board created a motion at our last meeting to support repairing the phone system. The resolution that's on here is a repeat of that. However, it's with legal terms that would help out with our auditors, because as we found out, once we put this into operation, the company that that does work on our phone system used to be on state contract. When we got the quote back in November and December, it was still on state contract. When we went to revitalize this work to take care of the board's resolution from last time, they're no longer on state contract. So this deems this as an emergency expenditure, so we're not then required to go out seeking bids. We could use the resolution that the board previously adopted, but this, the attorney's more comfortable with if we use this language. So it's more of a readoption of what we had previously done to support the action we're taking with the repair on the phone. Otherwise, it would just delay things for longer, and that's not what we want to do here. So, thanks, Mike. Any questions on that? And with that, I have nothing else to report.
Okay. Moving on to Orange Ulster BOCES report with Ms. Joanne Reed.
There was no meeting this month.
Okay. And the Ulster BOCES report, Vice President Frank Milazzo.
Last month for March, we met, actually had two presentations. Dan Pettigrew and Brian Fessler from New York State School Boards was there, really talking about pilots and the complexities and all the issues and problems and how the tax cap is figured and how pilots figure into all of that. So it was very informative, nothing really earth-shattering new for us, but it was a good presentation. A lot of the districts were represented.
Any specific thing that you learned in regards?
We're fortunate. We have Dan, and you know, they're our attorneys, so he's on top of it. He was actually the one that they brought in to talk. It was really to talk about how Ulster County does, because most of the districts are wholly in Ulster County, how the Ulster County IDA deals with issuing pilots and stuff, where obviously our biggest pilots are all in Orange County and are totally different. So.
Thank you very much. Moving on to our budget presentation with Mr. Brooks and Mr. Witherow.
Oh. That black line is not supposed to be there. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. The budget presentation for tonight tries to bring some finality to where this Board of Education is for developing the 18-19 school budget, and I try to come up with a theme for each budget. This particular one, obviously, you see in large print, there's stability and security. And that black line is there by accident, by the way. So stability, obviously, we want to continue a stable fiscal environment. And we're going to show you some information tonight that absolutely shows that that's where we are. Our Standard & Poor's credit rating increased this past fall from A to A+. We're a very stable, economically viable school district. We're in a great position, which is very, very important to stay that way. We also want to continue offering a high-quality academic program. So keeping our programs in place is an important cornerstone of our approach, especially going into 18-19 school year. Underneath that, with the black line through security, a strong academic program also requires a safe and secure learning environment for our children and for our staff. So really, those are the two foundations that we've approached this year's budget development process. First and foremost, since most of the dialogue regarding budget has been on safety and security, I do want to speak to some of the enhancements we're working towards as it relates to our school district right now. We're going to speak in general terms here. Obviously, the details regarding this will remain confidential, as we don't want to divulge specifically what we're doing with some of these areas. But in broad terms, we're looking at some type of a comprehensive security analysis from an outside firm. Come in and tell us what we don't know. We know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know as far as it relates to safety and security. And we have identified a firm that is aidable through BOCES that can come in and provide us with an assessment of all of our facilities in our operations, internal and external, and make recommendations, and also acknowledge things that we are doing well. So we think that that's a pretty important project that we should undertake, and that is something I would recommend that we undertake immediately and get working on that right away. This board and also our safety team and our administrative team are also reviewing some specific enhancements as it relates to actual operations within our school district. So right now we have a school resource officer at the high school and two part-timers that fill out what would constitute a full-time slot, basically, at the middle school. And we do not have a school resource officer at the elementary school. However, when there's a need for anything that requires police support, the SROs, either from the high school or from the middle school, do go to the elementary school. That's something that we should look at as a school district. Should we be putting a school resource officer and school monitor support at the elementary school? Right now, the staff level that we have at the elementary school that supports anything related to security and safety He's our greeter. Everybody else in the school is there to support the educational program. So at the middle school and the high school, we have school monitors. We have lunch recess monitors. Now, the elementary does have lunch recess monitors that work only in that lunch period time. So the hallways, the exterior of the building, and certainly that main entrance where most of the traveling activity is, we have a greeter there. We also are considering whether security guards would be appropriate to bring in, which is obviously an enhanced level over what would be a school monitor. That is a title that's under civil service in Ulster County, and we would follow those guidelines. And it's certainly something that this person at each of the 3 schools would be responsible for visitor and property management. That is something that we also want to with very open ears, listen to what a security analysis would tell us. Because we do have staff that work on these elements at the high school and at the middle school, but is it enough for the operations we're looking to carry out here? An area that we do want to take a close look at also is after-school hour security. Monitors for internal and external events. I think Mr. Cavazza told us we have over 3,500 listed events in any given school year. That's internal events that are run by the school district, whether they're sporting events or club events or even concerts. But then we also have external events. We have a lot of facility users. People use our buildings for great things. We don't want to stop that, but our schools are relatively, and those people are relatively vulnerable if we don't have some level of security for that time. Now, we do hire staff that helps to supervise, but those people don't necessarily have their eye focused purely on security. We also are going to be implementing a consistent visitor entry protocol and doorway signage, so there's more consistency between the 3 schools and also more clarity of what's expected as our visitors enter our schools. And also more consistent visitor badging so that there's clarity on who's in our school. We all wear the tags as we wander around as employees, and we do have badging for visitors, but we want to make sure that there's consistency in the way those badges are used and the way they're displayed in all 3 schools. So that really looks towards what we would like to see for enhancements. Obviously, there will be dialogue tonight regarding those elements. Just to give an idea also, there's some things that we currently have in process. So we are enhancing our phone public address and our Bell communication system by a full replacement. That we're expecting to complete and accomplish this summer. We did pull that out of the Smart Schools Bond Act so that we can move on that right away. As a matter of fact, that is in process right now, literally. Mike was working on it all day long today with Pat's office to get that staged and ready for a post-graduation install as soon as we possibly can. We also are in the process of upgrading our portable radios for a communication system within the district, and also we're enhancing our camera and our video system. So from a safety and security standpoint, we're looking for these enhancements, or at least dialogue on this, and these are some things that we currently have in progress. Now, at the last board meeting for a budget discussion, we were also asked to talk about some program elements that were discussed during the 16-17 school year for the 17-18 school year that we did not add to the budget. And there's 3 specific program enhancements: the technology education teacher that would be shared between the middle school and the high school, home and careers teacher that would be shared between the middle school and the high school, and a physical education teacher, which is a part-time ask, to help out with a structured recess option at the elementary school. These are the 3 positions that were discussed last April-ish, but not put into the 17-18 school budget. So that would be something that is for discussion tonight. Now, the rest of this I'd like to get through with Pat so we can get to questions and get back to discussion. But I think as we look at this presentation in its totality, let's spend a little time with Pat just breezing through some numbers and Then we can get to questions and dialogue on these items. Please.
Good evening. So we're going to review through some of the information you've seen before. We have some new information. One new piece of information, just with the discussion with our auditor earlier today at the audit committee meeting, is he's recommending that we budget the Smarter School Bond Act money, which we've not received yet, in the capital fund rather than the general fund. So when we come to next week for the budget adoption, that number will decrease by $1 million. So right now we had $1 million budgeted as an expense for Smarter School Bond Act and $1 million budgeted as revenue. So as you go into next week, when we go to budget adoption, you'll see $1 million taken off of each of those, and that will go in the capital fund. The main reason being that the Smarter School Bond Act projects tend to be a multi-year project rather than all encompassing in 1 year, and the capital project provides that flexibility to be able to run as a project rather than on an annual basis. But again, we did see a slight increase. This was 57,600, I think, at the last meeting. We saw a little bit, we've got an updated projection on our BOCES enrollment, so we did make a change since it's still time to make the change to reflect the actual expected expenditures. So it is up slightly because of that change in the expected BOCES enrollment for next year. So right now, as we see this 957,199, that's going to be a negative number next week because we're going to drop it by $1 million.
Well, wasn't it in last year's, though?
It was in last year's. And he said you couldn't do it in that way, but he recommends putting it in capital. It was in last year's, again, as $1 million for revenue, $1 million for expense. We didn't receive the revenue. We didn't make any expense. So just pulling it out is just a decrease of both sides of the equation, so to speak. The tax levy we've talked about previously, that has not changed. That's our levy limit for this year, and that's what we're proposing for the budget for next year. The major cost drivers, we've seen this before. The BOCES services, that was about $32,000 at the last presentation. We're now expecting about a $125,000 increase due to the updated projections and the school safety enhancements we talked about just previously.
It's important to note on that slide right there, the dialogue we're going to have with the board tonight is certainly about the items, but I want the board to understand that we would like to be charged, and I would charge ourselves also, if we don't get the direct charge from the board, is to figure out how many of those enhancements, whether they're programmatic enhancements or the safety and security enhancements, we can value engineer into the current budget limits. The cap is the cap. So now it's the challenge for us to figure out through other savings measures, enhancements that we've gotten from state aid, and making sure we clearly look at any retirements that we do get and whether or not those positions should and can be replaced so that we can replace those expenses with some of the other enhanced options that are there. So really what we're looking at is any potential school safety enhancements we would build into the current budget structure. So the dialogue we would have over the next couple of months is what we feel we can put into that without digging into fund balance. That would be part of our dialogue.
So an update on the state aid numbers have been finalized. So this is a comparison from 17-18 to 18-19. What's interesting or beneficial is we see a significant change in foundation aid. Foundation aid is a base aid that's not expense driven. So that is not dependent. When we look at the BOCES aid, we see a reduction of $345,000. That's a direct result of us spending less money with BOCES. So yeah, we're getting less aid, but our expense with BOCES is lower. So it's kind of a misrepresentation to say, well, we're getting less money. We're getting less money, but our expense is lower too. And again, we run everything that we possibly need or can run through BOCES to generate aid. We do that. It's just certain years we have more expenditures than other years, and you see that fluctuation. We did see a decrease in projected building aid. That comes directly out of the state calculation. Our expense on that is fixed. but that did impact our levy. That's part of the reason why we saw allowable growth in the levy this year, because we've been seeing increases in our building aid, which is why we've had 3 consecutive years of reduction in our levy based on the calculation. So the net effect on that is about, from year to year, about $189,000 increase in aid overall. Revenue, this is the same slide we've seen on previous presentations. So this, the fund balance historical review, this is numbers. It's going to be better represented in the next slide. But when you see the dollar change, anything positive means we had an operating surplus for that year. Anything negative, we had an operating deficit for that year. So last year, we came very close to perfectly balancing, just off by $90,000. That was a surplus. This year, we're projecting about a $2.1 million deficit. But it was a planned deficit. It's going to be a little bit larger than what we thought due to the $1.2 million issue with the Newburgh assessment error on Roaston. But again, it's a planned deficit. And then we have planned deficits for a couple of years until we get to the point where we drop some debt. About a $500,000 debt payment drops in 21-22. It's not a true $500,000 net because it will have an impact on our building aid because we receive aid based on that debt payment. But the following year, we drop a $1.2 million tax cert payment. We receive no building aid on that payment. So in 22-23, that'll be a true bottom line elimination of $1.2 million worth of expenditures.
So it's important to note, and this is what plays into the Standard & Poor's rating. In our lowest year, which would be the 2020-2021 school year, our fund balance and reserves, what's in the bank, is $8.1 million. This is the planned soft landing that we've been talking about for a number of years now. So you see that on the next slide.
Yeah, the next slide gives a nice graphical representation of what's been happening. So again, when you see a decrease, that's an operating deficit. Our expenditures exceeded our revenue, but then we had operating surpluses. We had just about leveling out to the 16-17 school year. Then we have planned deficits to our soft landing. This is the year where we've got about $8.1 million between fund balance, reserves, everything in the bank.
All right, and these 2 big years, the 2 previous years is when we received the 2 $4 million payments. The $4 million really boosted those bank accounts up and put us in a good place.
Yeah, I mean, we're in very solid financial footing. Our standard, when I first started here, our S&P rating was A credit watch. We then got upgraded to A stable, and then just recently, last fall, we got upgraded to A plus stable. So that's a direct reflection of this, building our reserves and fund balance. Understanding, and in those conversations, we've explained to them in detail that we expect to run a couple of years of an operational deficit, but they're looking at the overall number and seeing that we're still in really solid financial footing, even when we expect to be at our lowest point in 2021. This is an estimation of the tax rates. We have the 17-18 year and the 18-19 estimated tax rates. Again, these are estimations. I say it every time. There's so many moving variables that come into determining the tax rate. There's the equalization rate between the municipalities. You have growth within the municipalities. So there's a number of factors that make this really just a ballpark estimate. But this is what we are estimating given the data that we have as of today. And what that looks like on estimated tax bill increases, we run several scenarios. You have the basic star, the enhanced star, and no star. And then we run, based on a sale price home, $100,000, $200,000, and $300,000. And so these are the estimated tax increases associated with those estimated tax rate changes. And again, the same disclaimer is associated with these numbers, is that these can and will change from what they are today. And those are just factors that we have no control. If we see more growth within the district, these numbers are going to be lower. If we see a decrease in value of the district, these numbers will be higher.
And part of that, Pat, is really because, it looks like a larger increase this year, because of what Town of Newburgh did to us last year,
100%.
that, we got the decrease that we weren't supposed to get because of their error.
Correct.
So we've got to make that up, and then you have the small increase for this year.
Correct. And I just want to clarify, because I've heard some, some comments just saying, well, why, didn't the district know that there was an error? Then we did see an issue when we got the numbers, and we did reach out to the Newburgh assessor. So there's two things happening there, right? We have Roaston, which is on a court-ordered devaluation schedule over a 7-year period, and then we have Dan Scammer, which is on the pilot. The Dan Scammer value as it sits on the books is $15.5 million. The reduction in value of Roaston by the court order was $15 million. So when I got the numbers, I was expecting to see a decrease. I didn't see a decrease. So I sent an email and I said, hey, did you back out the Dan Scammer pilot? Because what they have to do is they have to go in and manually zero out that assessment, because they're not going to pay taxes. They're paying us in lieu of taxes through a pilot payment. Never in a million years would you think, hey, did you adjust Roaston? Because we're going into year 5 of that, and every year previous, you've adjusted it. So she came back and said, yeah, absolutely, we backed out the pilot. So the only thing that would explain that would be growth in Newburgh, which we saw about 2 years ago when we were expecting a large increase due to Roaston losing its large parcel designation. If a parcel represents more than 5% of the total value of the district, they get a special treatment through this large parcel designation. When that property was going to drop off because of the court order devaluation, we were expecting to see a bump. We never saw the bump because it was offset by growth in the town of Newburgh. So the only logical explanation, once they confirmed that, yeah, the pilot's been backed out, we said, must be growth in the town of Newburgh. Little did we know, they just had a clerical error, $1.2 million. So yes, this, as we looked at the last meeting, where Newburgh or Marlboro and Plattekill residents saw I think it was about a 1.6% reduction in their tax rate. Newburgh saw like a 1.5% increase, but overall the bills dropped. We should have seen a 3.6% increase in the tax rate last year. So again, what that really represents is we took $1.2 million out of our bank account and just disperse that to all the residents of the district as kind of a give back of that money, not intentionally, but that's the net effect of the end of it. So again, our 3-part budget comparison. This is our legally required manner to present the budget. Again, this number will be down by $1 million next week or at the next meeting, but overall, you can get the comparison splits. So right now, tonight, OU BOCES is having their annual meeting in Goshen, where they're going to adopt formally their budget. We will vote on their budget on April 19th, our next meeting, which is the same meeting that we will adopt the budget for Marlboro. And again, they have 2 3-year seats open. There's 2 people running, and they're both incumbents to the board. So I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Brooks for any questions, and I'll be available also. Thank you.
So again, it's our hope that we can enter into dialogue about safety and security. I would caution everyone, including our own folks on the board and here, that we should stick to priority discussion, and if we get into levels of detail, that's something that we would have to go into private session, because the safety plan is not subject to public disclosure. So we certainly can brief the board on the specifics. You have some information that does give you some of the specifics, but quite honestly, what I'm most interested in is, where do you want us to be related to these 3 slides, or it's 2 slides, these enhancements for safety and security and these enhancements for program review. And that's where I'd ask for the dialogue.
It would make sense to me that we first start at this comprehensive security analysis with an outside firm, because that will immediately identify any vulnerabilities if we have them, and look at our current security plan that we have in place, and perhaps if they need to be tweaked in various ways, versus, a fresh set of eyes that is not perhaps comfortable with our grounds, that can really come in and give us that look. So I would suggest we start that ASAP, so we have a better understanding of where we need to go from there.
Yeah, and I would reiterate from that, it really, it's premature, I think, to have any other discussions until that's completed and we have feedback, because we're not talking, none of it's going to affect the budget.
Correct.
We have, I think we've spent a lot of time coming up with this budget and where it's at, and anything we do on any of these three slides is going to be within the budget. We're not talking about adding any money to the budget. We're talking about staying within the confines of our budget. So I really don't, I don't personally see where it gives us any benefit at this time, other than saying, we need to do the security review, bring in the firm, do that, and then when we get that information back, bring it back to the safety committee, work some things through, then bring that back. Then when we know what the scope of that is, we'll know what pot of money is left, if any, to do any of it.
Correct. That's really where I'm asking us to be, because, correct.
I definitely agree. I think we should take it to the outside consultant, let them come in and tell us how our schools are running. So we can hire 50 people, 100 people, whatever, but if we're not putting them in the right spots, it doesn't work. So I think having someone come out from an outside consultant coming and going through each building will give us that plus things that we didn't see ourselves.
Right.
So are we suggesting you're going to do this analysis prior to us finalizing the budget?
No, it doesn't affect.
No,
Well, help me understand that part, then. Let's start there. What do you mean it doesn't affect the budget?
The budget number, we have a budget number that's already set in our presentation. Anything we're planning on doing, we're saying is going to stay within that budget number. We always have that safety net part of the budget that we look to roll to the following year. So if we decide that we want to fund one of these things or one of those things, whether it's the positions or other additional security, it's got to stay, we have to be fiscally responsible to stay within this budget cap number and not go over that. So there's no really, we're going to stay under the budget we have.
Correct.
So-
So regardless of what positions we end up adding or not between now and whenever, the capped budget is going to be the same. So the charge would be for us administratively to figure out priorities, which that safety audit's going to help us with. And then from that, adding dollar values too, which we already have, and seeing how far down that list we can get and what we must get to. And that's dependent upon efficiencies that we can build in from any breakage, aid package, or any other measures as far as value engineering any positions that we currently have to replace those with these. So will that be ready for next meeting?
Okay, I know
No,
what you're saying now.
no,
So what
definitely
you're
not.
saying now, let me see if I can restate this. The budget's set, whatever we do comes after the budget. And anything we add in terms of expenses is going to be offset by either some efficiency, of which you mentioned several, or going into spending more fund balance than we expected.
Correct.
But not fund balance.
Well,
It's
right.
not fund balance.
It's
till
the
end of
cushion that's
year.
in the budget.
Into that safety net that's built into the end of the budget.
It would be
Okay.
spending appropriated, we're appropriating reserves in fund balance, it'd be within that appropriated money we'd be
That's
spending.
what I
right.
meant.
Right.
So if this cost $100,000, we would need to either find $100,000 of
Saving.
other things we're not going to spend on, or it would be $100,000 more coming out of the bank account as an operating expense.
Yeah,
Just
because
as an example.
At the end of the picture, we can't go over what's going to be the $56 million in change, correct, Pat? That's gonna be the new number?
56,694,
Yeah.
055.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter what we do, because otherwise we've broken the budget, and even if you can't spend you could if you had a major capital thing that required an emergency or something, but not any other way.
Right, and really what this allows us to do is to not be hasty in decision-making. So it allows us to get that objective viewpoint and then really spend some time thoughtfully, even though we haven't been extremely thoughtful in the last month and a half behind the scenes, working through what you see as a general synopsis, really getting into the details of truly what would these positions do and how does that enhance the safety and security for our children. So that's a conversation that we had today in our superintendent's council meeting, and I'm looking forward to that document because it does help to drive it from a different set of eyes.
Well, and we've already looked at a lot of minor enhancements in the short term. There's been a lot of conversations with the police department. We have the ability, as when they have the resources, we're trying to work out the mechanism to be able to put resources at the elementary school because there's support for that, at least till now, and then that gives us to get it in place so we're ready for September.
Correct. So we have taken, without divulging a lot of detail, we have taken measures immediately, had already taken measures immediately. We're looking to continue to enhance immediately within the current budget structure. This is much more enhanced than we are doing right now, so we have to really explore administratively how can we create some more monetary efficiencies. I mean, there will be some retirements. Do we need to replace those areas, and instead of replacing those, buy these?
And you're only talking $6,400 for this audit, correct?
Correct, for the
Yes, I mean,
security
that's
analysis,
kind
yeah.
of a
It's a
no-brainer.
comprehensive analysis.
Do you think you would have that on our next agenda?
Jeez, I don't need it. Actually, it's a firm that works through BOCES, so it'd be a
BOCES,
cross-contract for us. Not only is it $6,400, which is not that much money, it's also aidable.
Yeah.
So we're going to cross-contract with Dutchess BOCES and buy it through them. I'll be able to put this into effect tomorrow, at least purchase.
Yeah.
It will be a while for them to schedule, come in and work and create. You would also expect that the firm is a little more busy now than they were 3 months ago because of Parkland. But yeah, we'll be able to do this order tomorrow.
Okay.
So I have some questions on the budget itself.
Sure.
First question is, how did we land with the state budget, or the state aid? I mean, just all the news came out that they came to some agreement and numbers came out in the papers, and you've been showing the progression. How does this compare, like where we are tonight, compared to the last one, for example? Did we fare better, or are we still the same? Or?
No, we did better. So initially, when we looked at, last year to what the governor's proposal was, we were looking at about a $51,000 decrease in aid overall, where now we're looking at about a $189,000 increase in aid overall. So we had about a $232,000 swing.
And the biggest number in that, too, is the foundation aid piece. Because
Right
under the
where we
governor's proposal, that was in the $200,000 range. Under the final adopted, it's $455,000. That is a dollar-for-dollar automatic contribution to the district. Whereas you see like a negative of $345,000 under BOCES aid, that looks like we're losing $345,000 in aid. True. But we also lost a tremendous amount of expenditures because that means we're spending less with BOCES. So that's kind of a sliding scale there when you look at that aid line.
Yeah, it's not a true reflection of loss. Same thing with the building aid. Building aid does funky things depending on what's on and what's off.
Correct.
So you're right. The foundation aid, which is permanent, unless they do some crazy thing again down the road, like they did years ago. But
The
for
gap
the most part, that's
elimination
a
adjustment,
permanent thing going forward.
Correct.
Where the others have a lot of fluctuation to them.
Correct. Some of, like the BOCES one is called an expense-based aid.
Right.
You expend it, you get aid based on that expenditure. The foundation aid is a formulaic aid. So there's a formula to it that calculates based upon a series of factors that are all negotiated in Albany that you end up with a dollar amount. So that's where we spend a lot of our time with our local legislators, and we spend our time in the legislative offices in Albany to affect the formulas.
Okay. Thank you. Next page, can you turn to the revenue slide? So in 2018-19, you appropriated approximately $3.8 million to come out of the reserves and fund balance, right? How do you come up with that number? And when you answer that, why not $4 million or $4.2 million, which can potentially offset the tax rate or something like that? Like, how do you get the number?
Sure. Well, I mean, that number is the plug right? So we have all these other revenues, which are various sources. We have our pilot, we'll take out the Smart Schools Bond Act, but we have, total revenue other than property tax, which is state aid and other local revenue from, admissions, various miscellaneous minor things. And in the end, what we have to do is we have to balance our expenditure against our revenues. So we have a known set expected expenditure, so then we add up all the revenues from all the known sources, and there's a gap between the two, and that's the number that fills the gap, that balances that out. And as I said, previously, a number of times, we budget at about 96% of expected expenditures, so we expect to have 4% kind of a cushion. As I said, we just had an adjustment of almost $100,000 because of another student coming in who's going to be a BOE student with a potential one-on-one aid. So, we know about that, but we could have 6 more, on June 1st that come into the district. So we have to have that flexibility to be able to absorb those additional unexpected expenses that will occur throughout the year. So, what that looked like for 17-18 was about $2.2 million. So the additional money is the money that actually is needed for the known expenses, right? So if we have a $3.75 million gap, I was expecting to spend about 1.5 of that and then have the 2.2 left over to roll back into next year because that was our 4% buffer. Now we're going to be spending, instead of, the 1.5, we're going to be spending 2.7 of it because of the 1.2 million shortfall from the tax collection due to the assessment error.
So think about it this way, John. Under a cap environment, the budget is basically fixed. Your tax levy is your tax levy if you go to the cap. Everything else has to be based upon every other revenue source. So if you look at our bank accounts as a revenue source, that number is coming out of the bank account, but then 2.2 million is going back into the bank account. We could make that number go to 5 million. But what would go down then would be our cap side on the levy. So if that goes up to 5 million, $1.2 million more, then that $1.2 million is going to be reduced here all the way out through.
Well, and more importantly than that being gone,
Right.
is because you've now effectually changed the cap going forward, we have no room to deal with rising costs and everything else.
Correct.
And we would be in a position of either having to go to a 60% vote or laying off employees.
Correct.
So if you reduce that, say you reduce that levy by $200,000 this year, it's $200,000 next year, the year after, the year after. Not only just that 200,000, but also the growth associated with that through the cap calculation. So we've had 3 consecutive years of a reduction of the levy. Like that's, I think you'd be very hard pressed to find any other school district in the area that's seen 3 consecutive years of reduction of levy.
So what that does for us really in the long run is that with these healthy end-of-year fund balance accounts, at some point in time we are going to have another dialogue over our building condition survey. The building condition survey has some pretty big ticket items that will need to be addressed. There's roofing work, there's some exterior envelope work, there's a number, we went through that back in the December, January timeframe. With these kind of reserves and the dropping off of debt, by the time we're able to put something together to do the work, we can put something together that will virtually cost us nothing at the local level, because we're going to have money in the bank. We can move some of these monies into the capital reserve to be sitting there waiting for a capital project, and they pay for each other. Between the aid you get on the project and the money you have in the capital reserve, it's paid for. That's the plan. That's why we put the capital reserve in last year, and now we can begin to work on a strategy for funding it for the long-term picture of when we can do the work. Here's reality, folks. If we're to put together something for the building condition survey that would ultimately have to be voted on by the taxpayers, at best, that's sometime during the 18-19 school year to seek voter approval. Once we get voter approval in the 18-19 school year, that work is really not going to commence until sometime in the year 2020. Because you've got design time, submission up to state ed, and approval before you can actually get going on the work. But if we got approved for the work and it was March, you can't do roof work in March because there's kids, so there's a lot of staging. So we're in a very good position to be able to tackle long-term issues because of where we are. That's real. Remember, we're looking long-term here.
And you're really aggressive even to think that that could happen in either of those years.
Correct.
I mean, just
But-
because we look how long it takes to get anything out of them.
Correct. Well, you're 100% right, Smarter Schools Bond Act, but
Ideally, we would want to look to time it with that $1.2 million drop.
Exactly.
Right, because then you're going to replace some of that debt, but that debt's going to generate building aid, which the 1.2 doesn't. And if we have money in the capital reserve to offset the local share, you could turn around and have a reduction in the tax rate while funding a capital project and no impact except possible reduction in tax bills in that time.
does that make sense, John?
It definitely makes sense based on the rules that you're presented to play within.
Right.
The part that doesn't make sense, that always drives me nuts, is part of this is being funded by taxpayers, right? The slight increases that they wind up paying funds the ability to do all this, which ultimately reduces taxes down the road or reduces the incremental impacts in any given year.
Correct.
But that part always just baffles me. And
that's
but
why
there's many more of them I know, like the building aid, rather better to get debt instead of pay out of your budget because you get building, things like
Right.
that, just.
And that's why we wanted to put this slide
Drive me
together,
nuts.
John, because really, if you look at this line here that's underlined, that's the bank account at the end of the year. So if you look at your own personal finances, you can look at your bank accounts at the end of a month, or maybe you look at it, at the end of a fiscal year, whenever you look at your health and your own financial status. And then you can decide, okay, look, we've got some money in the bank that we can do that big project that we needed to do. We need to, put a screened-in porch on, or replace a roof, or do the driveway over, or something like that. That's what this number is. In schools, you need to fund that through a capital reserve, through a capital or get it approved through a capital project, so voters have to approve it, that then also requires submission to state education department for approvals. Because remember, the local municipality doesn't govern our building project. So really, for example, for the town of Marlborough, there's a building project being proposed for Bayside Apartments. That goes through the town board, the town planning board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Our submission to the state education department is basically that. We submit all the plans, and they give us back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until it satisfies all the building codes under state education law. That's why it takes so long.
Okay.
And I think they said there are at least 40 weeks at SED right now on project reviews.
So you don't anticipate any real number changes from today to the vote next meeting?
Just the $1 million change.
So, yeah, the one,
Right.
but that's just really
That's just an accounting
change.
piece of where the money lies for doing that work. Quite honestly, that makes an awful lot of sense, because then we don't have to play this game year after year. We spend it, we didn't spend it, we spent it. It
You
just
could
sits
do it
out
this
there.
way, but then you have to encumber the money at the end of the year and carry,
So I didn't hear you when you said it, though. So he's coming 1 million out of the expenses and 1 million out of the revenue?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
The key there will be that's going to be really hard to explain when we put together the budget document to the public, because we can't, when you started to say that in the beginning, it's not a reduction.
Correct.
It's just a movement from here to here.
It's an artificial
We
reduction.
don't want it to look like it's a reduction. It's because it really doesn't affect the overall number.
Correct.
So we just got to make sure we're up front with that and say, we're just moving it from column A to column B or column A to column
Correct.
C. It doesn't affect anything. It just.
It's an artificial accounting deduction.
Right.
Or reduction, yeah.
Maybe we could get some local press on that issue too, that might help out.
Any other questions?
I'm good.
Okay, thank you, folks.
Moving on to public comment on agenda items. Should you have a comment on the agenda items, please approach the podium, stating your name and town of residence. Okay. Moving on to the consent agenda. Resolved that the Board of Education, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, approved the attached agreements, contracts, and reports as presented. Personnel recommendations, CSE, CPSE recommendations, health and welfare for Arlington Central School District and Kingston School District, donation for the backpack program, donation to MES from the PTA, revised contract for mail finance company, unofficial board meeting minutes of March 15th, 2018. Can I get a motion to approve the agreements, contracts, and reports as presented? Joanne? Second, Frank? Any discussion?
I have one. On D, the Kingston and Arlington, can you just explain a little bit what more it is? I mean, I know what it is, but it's a contract for students that go there?
That's for contract for health and welfare billing. So the way the law is set up is if we have students that reside within the Marlboro School District boundaries who attend private or parochial schools outside of the boundaries of Marlboro, the local district that that school is within is required to provide health and welfare services for those students, and then they bill back those costs to the home district. So if you look at it, we also bill out to districts for kids who go to Hudson Hills, which is located, it's a Montessori school located in our Middle Hope elementary building, which was closed. So we have kids from Newburgh, from Poughkeepsie, from all the surrounding areas, and we have to provide some nursing services and various other special ed services that we're able to then bill back. So it's the same thing. We have kids going to schools within these districts, and then we have to pay for the health and welfare services that those districts provide for our students.
And it's actually kind of odd that the current year.
What's that?
It's actually kind of odd that the current year. 'Cause
Yeah,
usually they don't set the
usually you're
rates
waiting until the end of the year.
at the end of the year once they set the rate and then send it to us.
Correct.
I have a couple of quick questions. Just verification on the personnel actions. These are just more of the shifting, right, Mike, of the teachers' aides movements?
That's correct, and we're coming pretty close to the end. When you talk about the terminations, creations, and eliminations, and then the appointments for the certificated, the teaching assistants.
Right.
We're coming pretty close to the end of virtually everyone being converted over, so we're close.
Okay. And then just the mail finance, what is this, a contract for postage equipment?
It's for the mail machines. We'd approved one previously, but the two schools, their machines didn't have a automatic feeder on them, so that's an item that they really were desiring. So we got the automatic feeders added, and this is the revised
So
contract.
what is this, like a purchase order, or is it a contract of services for from mail finance?
It's basically it's like a lease.
Oh, lease of equipment?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. I don't have any other questions then.
Any further discussion? Cast your vote. Motion has been carried 4-0. Moving on to recommended actions. Whereas the law firm of Thomas, Drohan, Waxman, Pettigrew, and Maley presently represents the Marlboro Central School District as general and labor counsel, and whereas that same law firm also serves as general counsel to the Valley Central School District, and whereas both the district and Valley Central have asked the law firm have asked the law firm's legal opinion on the issue of billing back school districts for health and welfare services for preschool students attending non-public schools. Now therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Marlborough Central School District waives any potential conflict of interest to enable the law firm to provide a legal opinion on the issue of billing back school districts for health and welfare services for preschool students attending non-public schools, and be it further resolved that the Board of Education authorizes the superintendent of schools to execute the waiver of potential conflict of interest in the form of annexed here to. Can I get a motion to approve the conflict of interest waiver? Frank first, Joanne second. Any discussion?
You want a little explanation of what that is? You got it? Okay.
Cast your vote. The motion has been carried 4-0. Moving on to further recommended actions. Whereas upon the investigation by the district's administration, the Marlborough High School's phone system has recently sustained multiple periods of prolonged outages on a daily basis, which, if unrepaired on an immediate basis, will pose a threat to the health and safety of students and staff members. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Marlborough Central School District declare these unanticipated outages of the phone system to be a public emergency if not repaired immediately. And be it further resolved that the Board of Education of the Marlborough Central School District authorizes the acquisition and installation of equipment necessary to immediately repair such phone system to eliminate the threat to the health and safety of students and staff at the Marlborough High School, and to authorize all contracts and/or purchase orders under the public emergency provision of Section 1034 of the General Municipal Law in furtherance of such resolution. Can I get a motion to approve the repairing of the system? Joanne? Second, Frank? Discussion?
That's what we said the other day, just not so fancy.
Correct.
Sounds a little more urgent, too.
Well, this is actually the terminology that designates it as an emergency expenditure, so it's fine.
Cast your vote.
I forgot we had a vote on it.
Motion has been carried 4-0. Moving on to old business. Is there any old business that the board would like to discuss? Any new business?
Yes, what's the date for the candidates for Board of Education to have their
The 15th?
application?
April
16th?
15th, okay. I wasn't sure if it was passed.
Isn't the 15th a Sunday this year? So they do Monday.
I believe it is the 15th, or I believe it is a Sunday, correct?
So it's the 16th.
Okay, I thought it was the first. I was going to ask how many there were. Okay.
Did you have a question, John? Moving on to other items. Does the board have any other items they'd like to discuss?
I just have a quick one. With everything that's going on, we talked about security and stuff. I know, with the bullying that goes on in the district, so I was just wondering, like, with our school psychologists, counselors, and all of that, if maybe, do they walk around at lunchtime in the cafeteria to check on the kids, see what's going on? Do we make them more accessible to their students? So that's where I'm kind of like curious to know is what we're doing with them. Are they out, in the cafeteria with the kids? Are they in the classrooms watching the kids that may be being, picked on or bullied, or the kids that are really quiet, are we engaging more? Especially because after all the shootings and stuff.
So are you asking, is it more of a referral from teacher or classroom aide versus that of an observation of those
It's like more or
specific
less like,
professionals?
if you go in the cafeteria, if they're walking around the cafeteria and there's, like one kid sitting by himself all the time, are we engaging them, finding out what's going on? Are they being picked on? Are they not being picked on? Be sitting in a classroom or, someone being made fun of. So I'm just kind of curious, do we do any of that? Because it seems to be like a lot of the kids that have had, gone into schools with the shootings and stuff have had issues being bullied. So I just wanted to see if our counselors or psychologists or,
It's a great question.
You know.
Today, we had actually relatively long dialogue about distressed persons, distressed individuals. And we are engaging with some professionals in the field beyond our expertise to help us identify and find supports for distressed individuals. So that was a discussion at the highest administrative levels as recently as today. But our health and wellness staff has also been conducting a building-by-building review under Ms. Mealy for the last 3 months and identifying then specific elements that are needed programmatically from a health and wellness perspective for each building and coming up with a guide of resources that are available. As far as day-to-day, I know that the people in this room on this side over here administratively work every single day wandering through cafeterias, hallways, and into classrooms and encourage staff to do the same at all times to help kids that are hurting. We want to engage with kids as much as possible.
right, and that's my, like I said, because you see kids all the time and they're getting picked on or
Well,
not.
and I got to stop you. You keep saying all the bullying and the kids that all get picked on all
Well,
the
I'm
time.
not saying all the kids.
Well,
right.
but that's what I'm saying.
just saying, but it just-
Broad
it's out
terms,
there.
broad terms like that make it seem like we have an epidemic.
We
I'm not
don't. We
saying
don't have- we don't- we
bullying
don't.
doesn't go
It
on.
does exist here, but
It
I'd
goes
like
on
to know-
everywhere, yes,
Right, but
yes.
I'd like to know what we're doing, and if
Yes.
we're taking the extra step this way, we don't have the problems. That if we can flag it now, how do we engage it? Do we get other kids involved? Because there is, it's in every school building.
Yes. and-
We would
From
encourage
kindergarten up.
any parents that are have concerns regarding their children, please contact your building administrator or me so we can work to help them out, because we don't want any children that are hurting, period.
And Mr. Brooks was at a meeting on Wednesday. We had a nice presentation from an expert in this field who's actually trying to draw an expert up from Rockland County. All the superintendents were there with the police chiefs, coming up with things that can help everybody. The professionals, the professional staff, even the teachers, just things to make things better for them. It's an ongoing thing every week. There's something else happening. And Mike taking the time out to go to those meetings every month and to try and get as much out of all of it as you can. It's not a lot. It's not a little bit of time. It's a lot of input, but I think it's working.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I learn an awful lot at each of those meetings. I mean, fortunately, I learn a lot, but unfortunately, it's not good stuff. It's not pleasant stuff. It's good stuff to learn about, but it does allow us to come back here. So Dr. Kevin Smith, we are going to be reaching out to him. He's offered his resources, but he's also really looking to the other individual that has more experience in schools to work with our mental health staff and our administrative staff to help with distressed people. There are distressed people in our society right now, including in our town and in our schools. So what can we do as a school system to help that? That's our effort right now.
I mean, and then some of the kids don't go home and say, I got picked on today, or I did this. And I mean, the teachers are living with our kids, and we have all this, psychologists, counselors here, social workers that walk around our buildings and say, hey, man, there's a child over there that may need our help. Correct. So that's all I'm trying to point out.
Well, maybe another way, too, to ask is we applied new resources this year towards a social worker in the elementary school for crisis intervention. Is that proving, that aspect of the crisis intervention, is that proving to be of immediate help and some resolution of what we were faced with prior to that, before them coming on?
I mean, Ms. Walsh and Ms. Kaplan, you can speak to the volume that you're dealing with at the elementary school.
we need to.
In regard to other items, I would ask the board to consider some dates for our 2-hour accredited training that we discussed. I spoke to NISMA today in Albany, and I'm hoping to secure Jamie McPherson for a 2-hour accredited training on critical conversations for successful community engagement. The dates that are available, and I tried to work it around those dates that you said you couldn't be here. So the dates right now that I've asked about are April 11th, the 12th, the 16th, the 18th, and the 30th. Does anyone have any objections to the 11th, 12th, 16th, 18th, or 30th?
And these are not nights where we have a meeting, right?
Correct.
And it's 2 hours, what are we saying, in the evening?
6 to 8.
6 to 8.
The 16th and the 30th are definitely good. What was the other, the 12th?
11, 12, and 30. 16, 18, 11, 12, 16, 18, 30.
I can do the 16th
12
Monday.
won't work, but 11,
Oh, 12 won't work for you? No?
nah, well, now I got a negotiation session.
Okay.
I'll be in Manhattan. So
Okay.
but the 11th, the 16th, or the 30th are all good now. still.
11, 16, how about the 18th?
18,
That's right, good, it's the night before our board meeting.
yep,
too.
the 18th's okay.
You say the April 30th?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why don't I see that? Okay, that's a Monday.
So we're trying to secure the specific presenter, and if I can just give him a couple of dates
Yeah.
that we can all agree upon.
I prefer Mondays or Wednesdays, which makes the 11th, 18th, or 30th work best for me.
Okay?
16th was too, right?
16th was one of the dates, right? 16th is Monday.
30th is a Monday. Oh, wait,
And
is
the
it? Or am I
30th
looking
is
at
a
May?
Monday.
Yeah, 16 and 30 are both Mondays.
Yep,
16th is too?
yep.
Okay, that works.
The 11th is a Wednesday.
Monday or Wednesday works best for me.
So far I'm hearing the 12th out of those dates are not good. The rest are okay?
Yep.
Okay. So, and 6 to 8 is, on those days, is a good time for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You might want to check with Russell and Jim, but probably okay for
I
me.
already got the.
You did?
Yeah,
Okay.
I did. I checked. So, any further questions about that? 2 hours, 6 to 8. It's different than what we will be doing in August, because August is a more specifically a tailored training to, per se, our specific needs, how we created that training to be. This is more of a set presentation on specific modules that have been found to statistically work versus those that don't.
Just thinking, any objection to maybe starting 6:30? Just thinking if anybody's got a work delay or something, 6 o'clock kind of
You
sometimes.
guys have to tell me.
That's what I would prefer, 6:30, just to give us some leeway.
Whatever works,
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I will ask about 6:30. So if worst-case scenario, they can only do 6, is that going to be a problem for you?
We'll just do it, but
Okay.
this is just thinking unexpected things that pop
Yep.
up and you give you a little more half
Okay.
hour to get
I
here.
will be more than happy to ask about that. Any other items? Okay, moving, did you have something? Moving on to the recognition of district residents. At this point in the agenda, I'd like to recognize any district residents. Please feel welcome to approach the podium and speak your name and town of residence if you so desire.
I want to preface with I had no intention of speaking tonight. Catherine Siriello from Marlborough. This is the last meeting before adopting a budget, and I'm looking up at 4 board members, 4 out of 7. This is the danger that happens when you don't fill a seat right away. Do you think that 4 board members is representing this community correctly? We have 2 board members not here who have a pattern of not being here.
So
And-
if I may answer that question for you, Mr. Kuha is mandated for night work occasionally, so he has to fill his responsibilities, and Mr. Conley had surgery.
Okay. Mr. Kuha has missed 33% of the meetings this school year. And if he had a job that entailed night work, this board meeting, it's every other Thursday. If you can't make the commitment, you shouldn't run. He's an incumbent, and I didn't want to call him out, but it's $57 million, and we're not being represented. And if we had had a filled board seat back when Mr. Bell resigned, then I'd be looking at 5 out of 7, not 4 out of 7. I know what the rules are about missing 3 consecutive, but I'm asking the board maybe to revisit that because I don't think you're representing the community correctly. If you can't make the commitment, don't do it. It's a volunteer position. I understand that things come up. I understand work. Listen, my husband travels probably 40 weeks out of the year. He wouldn't run for Board of Education because he can't. Okay? If you can't do it, you shouldn't run. That's all I'm going to say. I think that there should be some revisitation as to what the rules are, what the excuses are, how many meetings can you miss before you're not representing the community that elected you.
And I certainly do appreciate your point of view, and I can tell you this as the board president, that Mr. Conley and Mr. Kuha do have quite a passion for what they are doing, and when they can't be here, they take the time to either meet with me or with Mr. Brooks about what is going on in the agenda. So please, I certainly understand your standpoint of view, but I need you to know that they are very passionate about what they're doing here. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mark Reynolds, Southern Ulster Times. I just had 2 quick questions. On the phone work, is there an estimated cost on that?
Yes, the amount is it's estimated at $26,000, 24 and change, and then after the analysis, there was some additional cards we needed. So,
And is some of that aidable as well? Or is this just from the fund, the general fund?
I don't think so.
I don't think this would qualify as an aidable expenditure now.
Okay. And the other question I wanted to ask, Michael, if you could give us an update on the community college. Have they progressed any further and contacted you?
Great question. There's dialogue that's happened between the college president and the 3 school districts, Marlboro, Highland, and Walk Hill, about programmatic offerings. Now the level of discussion is going to move to the representative that works at SUNY Ulster, that works with the high schools on college programming, and high school principals and guidance staff to see what type of program can be put together. So that's really the next stage in the process, but there's nothing more concrete as far as specificity agreements or actual offerings put together yet.
Are they thinking of pushing the date back? Because they were thinking of the fall, I think, right, originally? Are they thinking push that further
I think
back?
that I think that, I mean, just looking at logistically, I don't know how there could be a fall semester start for college offerings. Could there be a January, meaning a spring semester start? Perhaps, but I don't want to put out any options. I mean, if we could, I don't want to put away any options. If we can start something in September, even if it's a trickle, great. but that's really up to the next level of dialogue as far as what programs can be offered that kids will buy seats for.
Okay, thanks, I appreciate it.
But the goal is to build a program that offers 200 level classes at this building. That is a direct savings for parents of children that are going to go to college, because they'll be able to buy college courses and have their kids attend college courses beyond the 100 level that we currently offer, which is a direct offset of much greater costs that you'll have to incur when your children do go to college if they're college bound. So fantastic opportunity if we can get it together.
Right, thanks.
Tracy Tambori, I have a question concerning early dismissal and late arrival, so I don't know who can answer it. If a student is eligible for that, are they expected to provide their own transportation, or does the district provide transportation for them?
In a situation like that, the district would not provide transportation.
Okay, so, all right, so let's just say you had a child, let's say a child had a broken leg or whatnot, would they still be expected to take the bus, or?
I mean, they would still have to take some form of bus transportation. Occasionally what happens is if a student has some type of physical impairment or some special need, we do have other vehicles that do other runs that are smaller, like a minivan or a car, that we would typically be able to provide some alternative transportation if it's requested.
But you would need like a doctor's note or something like that, correct?
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
We do have an executive session scheduled for the purpose of employment history of a particular person's proposed sale of a lease of real property. Can I get a motion to go into executive session? Joanne? John, second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No action after?
No action.
Yes, there might be action after executive session.